Welcome, friends, to the On the Way Home podcast. I'm your host, Michael Braithwaite. I'm with the organization called Blue Door that's been operating for the last 42 years in York region, recently into Durham region, a little bit into Peel, and we work with vulnerable people across York region, Peel, and Durham, helping them with housing, helping them connect to health services and to meaningful and well-paid employment. If you want to find out about the work that my team, that's a lot smarter than I am, doing the heavy lifting at Blue Door, go to bluedoor.ca. Let's talk about today's podcast and our guests. There's always a quest in our sector for knowledge. We have this huge problem of lack of affordable housing, homelessness is increasing. How do we solve it? So often we look across the country. Part of the reason we do this podcast is to share. These are the challenges, these are the solutions. But sometimes it's great to look outside of Canada or to other places where, and I say it during the podcast, the more we're different, the more we're like. There's a lot of similar problems. We've had guests from Australia and from the US, from the Netherlands on this podcast, and there's a lot of similarities and a lot of ways they're tackling that we can learn from. And a couple of years back, Nick Falvo, who's a consultant and does a lot of wonderful work around homelessness research. He's got a free textbook that you could download and learn. He organized a tour to New York City, a study tour, taking about 25 professionals in the sector to New York City to learn what are they doing, because they've got a huge challenge around homelessness. What can we learn from them? We did that for 3 days. And then this year, each year they build on it. This year, the tour was in London, England. And there's a lot of great stuff. I personally, I talk about this, have taken a couple programs with permission and augmented them for us to use in Canada because they work. They've got solutions. They've got over 50 million people in a space that could fit inside of Ontario. So you have spacing and housing challenges. They have had and continue to have many of the same challenges we have here in Canada. And so they put together this tour, 30 very diverse people from different backgrounds. We talk about this on the pod with we've had a city councillor from Ottawa who volunteers on a board. We have people from the city of Toronto, from Calgary, from BC. We have Emily Kellaway, who's on this, who's a young researcher with Away Home Canada, and whose energy was amazing, really just kind of looking at the preventative pieces, etc. So I was lucky enough in this podcast, we had Mel and Julie from CHRA and CIH, and we had Emily from Way Home Canada, and we have Nick Falvo on to talk about the tour. How did it come about? What were the learnings? What were the surprises? What can we take back and do here? What are we doing in Canada that's actually there could be some learnings for them to do in the UK and so on. It's a fascinating conversation. Nick talks about that he is going to put out a full report if you weren't able to attend, or if you did attend and you don't want the notes, a 30-page report with the top 10 list that he's going to put out shortly. Probably by the time this podcast airs, it will be on his website, nickfalvo.ca. But it's a fascinating conversation with some wonderful people. We had a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed it.
I am so pumped for this pod this week. I've got 4 amazing guests, not 1, not 2, but 3, but 4. And we're going to talk about something that occurred a little while ago on a study tour. It was incredible. But before we get to that, we've got to ask our standard question to the group. And that is, what does home mean to you? Now, Nick and Julie have had experience with this already. Nick, very much so. So I'm going to start with Mel and then go to Emily, then go to Julie, and then Nick, you're going to kind of bring it up the tail of this with a fabulous answer to. And that is, what does home mean to you?
Is this so we can't steal each other's answers? I don't know what they've said.
That's right. There might be overlap. There
Right?
might be overlap, but
setting the bar high. I thought about this question a lot, and I moved around a lot as a kid and didn't really ever feel like I had a home for a long time. And so as I was thinking about that, I realized that home is a place for sure, but it's just really a familiar space where your family are, where your people are, where your belongings are. It's often a comfortable space, and it often holds that notion of nostalgia, but not always, depending on where you are or how you grew up. But for me, that's what home is. It's a place, but also like a familiar space where your people and your belongings and your safety is held.
I love that. I don't think we've ever had familiar space, and that's brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Mel. Emily, no pressure.
Yeah, well, mine's actually quite similar to Mel's. I've lived quite a few places in Canada, and I've had the privilege to get to travel quite a bit over the last few years. And when I think going home, I kind of am always thinking coming back to Toronto. And it's not just because I grew up here and have all the memories, but it's really where my family is, where most of my friends are, where my support system is, and all the people I love. So I think home to me is really that family, that support, and that love.
Hey, you mentioned you were in the middle of a move, right? As we are doing this right now. So home as a four walls and a roof is going to be a little different for you, right?
Well, and the funny thing is, I'm actually moving 7 floors up, and my parents are moving into the place I'm in right now. So very close to my family. Yeah.
Home is family. Awesome. Julie?
So I think Mel went back and listened to my podcast and stole my answer because it's very, very similar. But that's all right. Mel and I often have similar answers, and because I, like Mel, moved around enough when I was a kid that it's not limited to a specific location, but rather that feeling of being grounded and at peace. For me, this can also include the community that I lived in. I live in a small town in kind of Northern Ontario, depends on who you ask, but Northern Ontario is. And that community, I moved away from it for a while and had to come back because that community made me feel like home. So I think that Mel and I have similar answers, that it's not about a place, but it's about a space, and it's connected to a feeling.
Awesome. Love that. Nick?
I'd say home is not just 4 walls and a roof. It's home involves all the supports you need, and it involves organizations proactively offering those and delivering those services. We have to remember that in Canada.
Nicely said. Nice way to follow that up. Now, you have I always talk about, we're in the younger grades and you have little career things, or people come in and talk about maybe you want to go out, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'm guessing out of the 5 of us, most of us did not know in grade 2, like I'm going to be a researcher, or I'm going to work in housing, or I'm going to be an advocate, that kind of thing. So we want to learn about your journey. This time we'll switch up the order a little bit. We'll start with Julie, go to Emily, Mel, and then Nick at the end. Sorry, Nick, because I'm going to give you some time to add to your journey, because I'm sure a lot has happened in the few months since we've talked to you last.
It's a good question, Michael, because I think a lot of people end up in housing, but in Canada, not a lot of people strive to. And I think some of the work Mel does with CIH will change that for future generations. But I came from Parliament Hill, being an event planner on Parliament Hill, to CHRA. And when I first started with CHRA, my role was solely about events. I left the House of Commons working there to go back to working in not-for-profits because I wanted to be making a difference in a different way than in politics. But I learned a lot, and since starting with CHRA, my role has evolved to cover programs and partnerships as well as the events. So that's the career trajectory, the most recent part of the career trajectory.
Emily, I think you're up next.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I did my undergrad in health studies, actually, followed by a year-long certificate in mental health and addictions, and then went to school to do my master's in public health and social policy. Worked many jobs, some related, some not so related, but I was always kind of brought back to the idea of social determinants of health, social policy, and the public health model of prevention. And as part of my master's of public health, I had to do a practicum, which I was lucky to have the opportunity to do with the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, which helped bring me into this world. And then from there, did a policy internship with Away Home Canada, which then moved into a full-time position with Making the Shift, which is co-led by the Observatory and Away Home. So now I get to work across all 3 organizations, which is amazing. They all really emphasize that importance of prevention and early intervention, especially with youth. So I think I'm really in my element.
Awesome. And you've got like the housing homelessness bug now, right? Like you're saying, I remember talking to you and you're saying like, I'm in. You see yourself in this for the long haul, eh?
Totally.
Very cool. Mel?
Yeah, for me, so I'm in education in housing and homelessness, and sort of, I think, fell into it. I went back and did my master's in 2016. after doing a honors bachelor in a small college in Red Deer, Alberta, where I got to know the entire faculty. So as soon as I finished my master's, they asked me if I wanted to teach part-time in sociology at Red Deer College. And so I started teaching, and while I had done my master's in communications and thought that was going to be my route, I started to love education and getting back into sociology and into those kinds of routes. So I started to look for aspects where I could meld the things together, education, but also social justice and helping the world. So I started doing that. I ended up working in the education realm in the gender-based violence, domestic violence sphere at the Alberta Council of Women's Shelters. And so that's kind of my first foray really into housing. And then from there, I migrated over to CHRA and CIH to do their education. And it's a way that I can spend time with people, but also teach and speak and incorporate all the things that I love. And I wouldn't have it any other way.
And do a quick plug for CIH so people know. I think one of the pieces for a long time in this, and it's a whole nother podcast, but in this space we've talked about before, where there's no really direct education if you're getting into housing, homelessness, right? It's people usually come from all these backgrounds that you guys are all talking about, leads into it. But now that's all kind of changing, right?
Yeah, we're trying to change it here in Canada. We've got 3 different education streams where if you're new to housing, or if you're experienced in housing, or if you're really experienced in housing, you can get some certification and professionalization, add some letters behind your name, and have the same kind of designation as they hold in places like the UK, where housing is seen as more of a career and less of a job as it can be seen here in Canada.
I know, Nick, you've got a really cool career path because you started on the front lines in this stuff and really kind of fell in love with it, and then kind of went more the educational route.
Yeah, I was doing a master's degree in political science, and it was at York University. And I was particularly interested in inequality and poverty and who wasn't getting a fair share of the pie, so to speak. And I just found the university context, as much as it's important, I just found that they weren't really talking about poverty or housing or homelessness in a way I could really understand. So I happened to have a professor whose son was in the sector. And that son is actually a very well-known guy. His name's Nick Falvo, who is a recipient of the Order of Canada. He's very involved in the food security sector now. Nick helped me get my foot in the door at a place in Toronto called Dixon Hall. And they had a men's shelter. And as they used to say in that sector, they're always looking for relief workers. So I got a relief job. The first shift I used to work began at 4:30 a.m. and ended at 9 a.m. That was a fun shift to work. I was actually quite grateful to get it, but eventually I sort of climbed my way into other positions in Toronto, but always with the goal of heading back to academia to finish things off and to get sort of a last degree. And so that brought me back and to do a PhD. But really, I wanted to learn about poverty, and I had to get on the front line to learn it because studying about it in the classroom just wasn't cutting it.
Very cool. All very interesting and unique journeys into this work. Today we want to talk about the London study tour. And Nick, this is the second tour. London was the most recent one, London, England, that is. But before we talk about that tour, last year we had the first tour, to my knowledge, in New York City. How did the tour idea come about? And how do you decide on where to go?
So several years ago, in collaboration with the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association, I developed what was called Homelessness 101, a full-day pre-Congress workshop at Congress. As some of you know, there's a CHRA Congress every spring. The next one's happening in Saskatoon in, I think, April 2025. And so they have pre-Congress workshops before things kick off. And so CHRA helped me develop a pre-Congress one on Homelessness 101. It was going really well. And then we were about halfway through COVID. And I thought, I got to get out of this house. I'm going stir crazy COVID, like a lot of you were. And I thought, how do we marry homelessness and housing education with getting out of the house? A bit of a paradox, I suppose. And I started to think about the idea of a study tour because I knew some had happened in the past, some led by Steve Pomeroy, for example. And I had been working with CIH Canada on another project, and I approached CIH Canada and I said, how would you like to do a study tour? And how about we start in New York City? So it was the first attempt. Michael, you were there, May 2023. We didn't really know what we were doing. We were flying the plane as we were building it. What is it? Building the plane as we fly it, kind of thing. And that was a trial year, and it was a major success. The take up and the registration was really strong. So we said, well, we got to keep doing this. And so London was an obvious choice, in part because CIH Canada has strong links to London. The mothership, so to speak, is CIH, which is based in the UK. And so we knew that London was a very viable place to have a study tour. And then CIH and CHRA encouraged us to go 5 days to do housing and homelessness. And then once again, take-up was really strong. So London was an obvious choice, largely for those CIH Canada connections to London. And it's been great to get the larger tour happening, 5 days.
Yeah, and I'd say, the first year you put it out there and it was overprescribed. This year you had a waiting list. I think people are craving the knowledge. They love. I think they also, as you said, love to travel and get out and with purpose to that. This year was a little different. There's a lot of interest, but so let's talk about who participated, from what backgrounds. And how did you reach out? How did you decide kind of how to put this group together? And then Emily, that's for kind of Mel, Julie, Nick. I want to find out how, what interested you? Why did you want to go on this? So let's start with that. Talk to me a little bit about the group that went and the backgrounds they came from. And that's Julie, Nick, and Mel, whoever you want to kind of jump in and chat about that. Feel free.
We had a really diverse group come. So there's 30 spots on the tour. For each half, it was kind of divided into the homelessness stream and the housing stream. So we had 30 spots for each stream. And I think the intention was that a lot of people would sign up for either or, but most people ended up signing up for both. So we had 25 people who signed up for both the housing and the homelessness section. And so we're together the entire week. And then we had a few people who came just for the housing and a few people who came just for the homelessness sector and had some turnover there. And with that, we had, a very diverse background. We had, a city councillor from Ontario who was a board chair, but, in her day job is a city councillor. So that brought, that perspective. We had people from across Canada. We had someone, from the north. We had someone from BC. We had someone from the East Coast. We had a very wide perspective of people across the country, and then even just a variety of roles. So we had people in leadership positions. We had people in education positions. We had people in advocacy positions, and so it was really this great combination of people who got together with different passions, but all together and joining to learn more. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was a really interesting part for me, because I wasn't sure how that was going to play out in terms of the discussions that we were having, the questions that were asked of the tour participants. And I thought, Emily, you're one of the participants that I was like, oh, they're coming from a really cool perspective. And you asked some really hard-hitting questions. And I thought, it opened the eyes of some of the other participants. So I think that was like a layer of the tour that I was not worried about, but just like, I wonder how that's going to play out, that actually added to the participants, opened their eyes to just different ways people are approaching things in housing and homelessness that we might not either regionally be aware of or just aware of because of the work that we're doing, because it is so different.
Nick, anything to add on kind of the special group you put together? And I was there. I agree that it was pretty cool because you did have a really unique balance of all sorts. And I think, like any conference, it's not so much even the places you go; it's the people you go with. And for me, I got to know the first year. I got to know Victor from Parkdale way back. Like we spent time walking. We spent a lot of time walking. So you have these chats with people, and to me, that's one of the biggest pieces. This tour, same thing. Walking with people that you don't normally connect with or don't have a lot of time with, and talking about what you just saw or what you're going through, the challenges, and breaking through. So it was a pretty unique group, and a little different this year, Nick, from last year, right? Because last year you had a police element in there, not this year. Did talk about that, yeah.
So when we were going to New York City, this is kind of a funny story, I suppose. We're going to New York City, and we had the opportunity to learn about a partnership between a nonprofit in the, I guess, community homelessness sector and the New York Police Department, known as the NYPD. And I thought that sounds neat, a partnership. And they did a partnership where they worked on de-escalating conflict amongst people who had serious mental health challenges. And I thought, I don't hear about those partnerships very often. This might be a great opportunity. And then we were told, oh, and you might be able to have the tour at the NYPD Police Academy. And at the NYPD Police Academy, they have actors, performing roles, and they have, mock subway cars too. And I thought, well, that sounds neat. And then we were told, well, if you want permission to go to the police academy, it would help if you had people in law enforcement. And so I put the word out that we were looking for people in law enforcement in Canada interested in homelessness. And I swear within a week, we had 3 or 4 confirmed people from law enforcement. I had no idea law enforcement was that engaged in the homelessness sector, to the point where they could get approval on an international study tour within a few days. And so they came, we had that dimension. And I'll be honest, the law enforcement people and the nonprofit housing people didn't always see eye to eye on things. That made for some interesting conversations, but I would also say some interesting learnings as well. You learn from these debates.
Yeah. No, I agree. I found it fascinating. I would walk with, and they would talk about, hey, so I was walking with someone, law enforcement from Victoria, right? And they were talking about decriminalization of drugs. Again, in theory, it's great, but here's what I'm seeing on the ground. It's really just, so I didn't have, it was really interesting to learn that and have that perspective, and them fascinated by some of the pieces in homelessness. Say, wow, we've got to do better, or I understand things more now as a law, because of that tension that exists. Not this year though. We had primarily, we had a lot of researchers and different people, and we had someone who was really, really young on our tour. Not that you are not all young. I mean, Mel's much, much younger than me. But Emily, as the youngest person, I believe, on the study tour in both years, if we put that together. How did you find out about this tour, and what interested you, and what were your thoughts going in and hopes?
Well, someone who didn't join last year, I still was following along on all the resources that came out. I found they were quite interesting. I know the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness shared Nick's top 10 lessons, and there was a lot of really interesting aspects of that. So ever since then, I was like, I need to go on the next one. But as part of my role, I highly encourage everyone to check those out if you're interested, and I look forward to the ones from this year as well. But as part of my role, I've been looking at youth homelessness policy and practice in other countries, and England has been one of them. So I knew when this specific opportunity came up, it would be perfect. I think learning about homelessness in London met my expectations. I think there was a lot of lessons that I learned that I hadn't known before, but it was what I expected. But I was actually pleasantly surprised by how much I took away from others from Canada on our trip, and just that connection. And like Mel and Julie had mentioned, just the diversity in the group. I think it was really interesting learning about what others on the tour do, and just getting to know them on a personal level. I had quite a few big learnings that I took away. I was especially interested in how they approached diversion and prevention in London. For example, St. Mungo's that we visited, they talked a lot about their work with those being discharged from prisons, and how much success they had in ensuring that those being released had somewhere to go, whether that was trying to hold on to apartments that they had from before just for a little bit longer, or leaning on friends and family. And I think that family and natural supports work is a huge part of what we do, and something that we've seen there's been a lot of success within Canada, especially with youth. But it was interesting talking to the folks at St. Mungo's, because they were kind of like, yeah, why do we wait so long to do this work? Like, maybe if we had been doing this earlier, these folks wouldn't have ended up in the prison system in the first place or in shelters. So I think there was a lot of takeaways with that, and just gauging where they are in terms of their prevention diversion work. And I think there was mutually a lot of learnings around that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Emily. You're right. We can learn. I mean, we learn so much. And listen, two programs that I personally stolen from, with permission, from the UK are Night Stop. We brought that to Canada because it's brilliant, right? And I think even before us, when you take 50 million people and try and jam them in a space that's smaller than Ontario, you're going to have some challenges around space and housing. And they have done a lot of things really, really well. So Night Stop. Another one we took was Reside. It was out of Leeds. They were doing where they're repurposing vacant housing, and everyone's really open to. I'm always so surprised that I actually will cold call. Like Steve Gates told me about Night Stop. He's like, "It's cool." So I just went online, cold called someone, and said, "I want to bring it to Canada." And I think they thought I was a little crazy, but we made it work. And after a while, we're like, "Well, why not?" Right? Why not? And now it's Clovis Grant is doing extraordinary things with that at 360 Kids. He's got it into Durham, etc. Accredited program. But yeah, we can learn a lot. So that's the question to the group too. Is I have a two-part question for each of you, and that is, what is something you want to bring back, that you could bring back, you think that they're doing that you could bring back here? And the other thing, I'm going to turn that around on you, and is, what is something you think we're doing in Canada that they might be able to take and do in the UK? And this time I'm going to start with Nick, because poor Nick, every time he's the last go. And then I'll go Nick, Emily, Mel, then Julie.
In terms of what I would want to bring from England, from the study tour, I would say it was the Prison in Reach program run by St. Mungo's that Emily referred to. In Canada, it's my understanding that we have a patchwork of services, I suspect led by John Howard Society and EFRI, that have connections with correctional facilities and help some inmates go into the community afterwards, help them with income assistance applications, maybe with some medical supports, and also housing applications. But my understanding is these initiatives are spotty. They're not mandatory. They're not present in all cases. They're present with some correctional facilities, with a small number of nonprofits, for some inmates who are about to be discharged into precarious housing situations. And St. Mungo's really has scaled this up, and they're in many prisons across the London area. So I would love to see Canada learning from that. In terms of what Canada has that London doesn't, or let's say that England doesn't, I think we lead the way on harm reduction. I think we do important, innovative work on harm reduction, and we have lessons about the overdose crisis that other countries can learn from. I would look at Homes First Society as an example. They had several representatives on this tour. I think they're a great innovator in harm reduction, and I think other countries could learn from them.
Emily, we're going to go to you next, and then Julie, and then Mel, I think. And if I reverse that order, I apologize.
Yeah, definitely what Nick had been saying, and how I had mentioned before about the St. Mungo's program. I also was very interested in their kind of data sharing and databases around chain. I think that there's a lot of work and a lot of potential there. We've been looking here at linking administrative data. I think some of the ways that they were enumerating rough sleeping to go into that data system, I think there was a little bit of work that could have been done there. We heard from some organizations that apparently those who are sleeping in tents might not be considered rough sleeping enough, and then wouldn't be entered into the system. So I think if they were expanding that, it could really open up so many other possibilities, because the actual data sharing that goes on behind that, I think, is very interesting. And then as well, I think it would be great. I mean, I've had so many conversations with the people from London before this trip from the work that I've done around, and they're doing some incredible work there too. I do think they could lean into the family and natural supports work a bit and building that connection and that support system. And when I say family and natural supports, I really mean whoever that youth decides is family, chosen family, cultural connections, that kind of thing. But I think really understanding that how youth experience homelessness is different and trying to build that support network for them. I think there's some work that can be done there as well, but I think they're moving in that direction.
Very cool.
Mel, do you want to rock, paper, scissors for who gets to talk? Since, or like, do you want to have a Canadian standoff? What would you like to do here?
Just go for it, Julie. Just go for it.
Okay. So I, like Emily, was fascinated about the data, which like is so surprising because I'm not a data nerd at all. But it was so surprising that each place we went to talked about having access to data. So I'm actually allowed to say that CHRA, in the 6 weeks since we've been back, I've been busy starting to work on a feasibility study for CHRA to create some sort of data dashboard. I've been home for only 6 weeks, so we're not very far in what that looks like, if it's possible, where that data comes from, what is that data? So listeners, please don't email me with questions because I don't have the answers yet. But it was so incredible to me that these providers had access to that data and what that meant for the programs that they were able to put into place. So I think that we're going to see what we can do in Canada. As Emily was mentioning, some of the stats and the way that they collect them might not quite match what we decide or what is reflected in Canada. But we're definitely going to try to do that as well. Something that I think that they could maybe learn from us is about our approach to minorities, especially in the LGBTQ community, because Emily had asked some pretty great questions of the providers, and they just were like, "We don't know, we don't deal with that." And I think everybody in the room was like, "What do you mean you don't deal with that?" Like we were all kind of a little bit like, you have to be dealing with the folks in the community, you know what I mean? Like they're out there. If you're not dealing with them, there's a problem. But their approach was very, very different. And then some were very reluctant to answer Emily's question because they hadn't gotten there yet. So I think in Canada we're maybe a little bit more advanced in that way.
Yeah, and for me, I think my the learnings for the London part were twofold. I think one of them was, as the representative for CIH Canada, I have to keep plugging it, but in the UK, it's actually mandatory that you have some kind of education professionalization when you're working in the housing sector. And I think that just, gives a good understanding across everybody who's working there, that they have the same knowledge base, they have the same understanding of housing and how to help and how to, be landlords. And so I'd love to see that. Not quite to that level. I don't think I'm not equipped to handle everybody in Canada who works in housing to come to me for education. So if you're interested, do contact me, but please not all of you at once. So that's a big thing. But I think the other thing that really hit home for me was we went to a couple different locations, and I believe Poplar Harka and Peabody were probably the best examples of them, where they have a great mix of social housing, but also market housing, where they had, the buildings where a couple of the floors were social housing, were heavily subsidized housing, but they were subsidized by the market rentals that were on the other floors. And then they had on the top floor, they'd have, the beautiful space for, recreation, and you could opt into paying for that. So if you lived on one of the floors where maybe your rent was subsidized, where you couldn't afford, didn't need that extra space, you didn't have to pay for it, but the others in the building did. And so there didn't seem to be, in some of those situations, the same level of NIMBYism as we have in Canada. I'm sure they have it maybe in different situations, but also with Poplar Harka, they had a beautiful youth space that was right next to a school that was for their clients, but also just for anybody in the neighborhood. So everybody could go, they could get dance lessons, they could access doctor services, they could have a space to hang out. And it was a beautiful space. They had a good amount of funding for it. But it was also a space where the community could come together, and it wasn't, low income versus high income. It wasn't those on assistance versus those off of assistance. It was just everybody together. subsidizing each other and helping each other. And I thought that was a beautiful aspect of community that I personally haven't seen that in Canada, where we've got those kind of mixed buildings. Maybe they exist, and I don't know. I'm still fairly new to this role, but I thought that was pretty cool. And I'd love to see more of that here in Canada, where we've got the new builds that are happening, but the subsidizing for them comes from people paying market rent, and that's a way to keep it sustainable. I think one of the things we do here in Canada that maybe could be brought over there is they had a lot of we have a lot of red tape, but they had a lot of red tape in regards to location. So people who lived in one borough could not access services in another borough, could not live in another borough. And especially, I came from the shelter world, right? The domestic violence shelter world, where, if Edmonton is full, we will pay for you to go to Grand Prairie. We will pay for you to go to Calgary. Like, if there's a space, we try to put someone in it. And so that is not something that can happen because of their red tape in London anyways. I'm not sure for the rest of the UK. And I think that that's something that they could probably learn from us a little bit about.
Thank you all for that. Yeah, and Mel, a good example of what you were talking about, the mix piece that has worked really well, because it does, is actually Regent Park, where they built a community. They did exactly what you were talking about, but they revitalized. Like, it was an example of how not to do it. They're pretty little, and they redid it, and you don't know who's subsidized, who's not. The community's, and it's revitalized the whole area. Like, it's really a good example. Now, have we duplicated that? It's been around for a long. No. But that is a good example of that. And yeah, you're right with those spaces. It was brilliant and beautiful. And you're right with the whole. We do that a little in Canada too. The whole, if you're from this area, like we always say, well, this Steeles divides Toronto, and where someone experiencing homelessness, like I don't care. I need to be housed, and I'm going to go back and forth. And we do push them. Now, Nick, if you recall in the U.S., which was funny, like and they were hardcore in New Jersey. It was like, if you're not from here, your last known location, if it's Florida, we're putting you on a bus, you're going back. And someone said, well, what about someone with no fixed address? And the answer was, Nick, everyone has an address, a previous address, even if wherever it was, you're going back. I'm like, wow, they were hardcore about the whole, service and doing that. I'm going to share my learnings too about what I learned. I mean, there was lots to learn from them. It was fascinating. One of the things I remember them mentioning was kind of cool was one of the questions we often get asked in the sector from Canadian citizens, like, what can I do? Like, what do I do? I see this, and how do I take action? And they mentioned something around a QR thing, where they actually, if they saw something, they could write and say, hey, on the corner, whatever, I saw this. And then someone would follow up, and we were sending an outreach team, and they'd follow up with them afterwards. So people actually could believe we are part of the solution, and we can take action, and actually someone will be helped, and they'll be done. I thought that was super cool. The more we're different, the more we're like, where the saying goes, but we are like, in the sense that we're sitting in that piece, and one of them, and they were talking about how they were struggling to build because they didn't have people in the trades. And I thought of Blue Door's program, Construct. I thought Construct would work. We never thought of it outside of Canada. We want to scale it across the country, but it could work in the UK a little differently. And why not? Here's the model. Here's what's working. Emily's preventing homelessness because it's making short stays before they go in, or pulling them out of homelessness because it's paying them a living wage, so to break the cycle of poverty. So I thought they could learn from that, and why not, and have these conversations. Why could we not bring that over? So we're going to have a conversation that way. Was there anything I want to put it to the group, like when you're walking through that, there's some things I think we expect, like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool, whatever, but like big wow, like I was surprised that, and you've mentioned some of them about like, hey, I'm surprised that, here's the boundary you can't do, but what do I like, and you don't have to have an answer, but any big surprises that you weren't expecting from the tour?
Go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say, for me, there was a group dynamic surprise, something I wasn't expecting. On these tours, we typically rely on public transit, and it's generally convenient. In a dense city, it's usually the fastest way to get across the city, and it's quite inexpensive. What I didn't realize until this year was just how much fun some of our participants would have on public transit. When we were on the tour, we were communicating with the WhatsApp app, which is often good for international travel. And at one point, a bunch of us split up, and one group was on a double-decker bus, and they're taking selfies of each other and sharing them with the rest of us. And it's like everyone was having a ton of fun, like they were on some, grade 12 field trip. I didn't see that coming. I thought people would find that public transit may be a bit irritating, a bit of a chore, but people actually had a lot of fun in groups on public transit. One of the nice benefits of this study tour, I didn't see that coming.
Let me tell you that if you need a selfie taken ever, you need it to be taken by Mel Willard. The photos that were taken and the fun we had on a double-decker bus when we were the only people on it was quite great. So Mel, I might have just set you up for places like our Congress and Housing on the Hill that people are going to come up to you and be like, hey, are you Mel? We need to do a selfie because it's definitely an advantage of having
Mel brings the fun. She brings
That's
the fun.
correct.
Yeah, but don't do that for Julie, because Julie does not repay the selfie love. The selfies that Julie take are,
I look great. I'm concerned with myself, Mel. I apologize. I'm sorry.
On the public transit note too, Nick, we found the Uber boats. So we took an Uber boat at night of a group of us, and that was some said it was one of the highlights of their trip. So lots of fun on public transit.
And Emily, I'm thinking, the key that young people seem to have with selfies is to take 45 with the same picture, right? When you hand them is that the key to a good selfie?
Well, I actually brought a little film camera where you don't even get to see the photo until you actually get developed. So reversal. Yeah.
It's crazy talk.
I do have something I was surprised by, a bit of a different tone than what you were all mentioning, but I was surprised by just the efforts to further criminalize homelessness there, with actually one part of the draft legislation that they had been mentioning suggested that people experiencing homelessness could potentially be arrested for antisocial behavior, such as even smelling too badly, which I was actually just at the Fianza Forum last week in Vienna, and Matt Downey, who's the CEO of Crisis in the UK, was also talking about this. And I think it's not, that problem isn't just in the UK. Like, this is everywhere. And I think Matt did a very great job talking about, like, we can live in this bubble when we're working in this sector, thinking everyone thinks the same thing as us. Like, we're on this crazy road to like everything being better, but it's such a reminder, like, oh, the rhetoric and the conversations, the dialogue that's happening about people experiencing homelessness can be very different on the other side. And I believe this has since been removed from the draft legislation, thanks to a lot of advocacy work on behalf of many of the organizations that we visited. Actually, they were doing a lot of that advocacy work leading the way. But I think it's just an important reminder of how important that advocacy work is, because I think we feel like we're just like a broken record saying the same thing over and over again, but maybe we need to find different ways to say it and bring in people who are the unlikely suspects to then join the mission and really be kind of breaking down that stigma and stereotypes. Because that was surprising to me, but not just London specific. I think it's just a reminder in general.
I think, like Eddie, like, you think we've come so far, and then you're reminded we've got so far to go with something like that. How ridiculous. There was a story a few years back in Toronto of a guy who had $65,000 of fines that eventually they wiped them out, but it was preventing him from ever getting housed because he had this like 65, like, it was ridiculous tickets, right, of vagrancy or whatever it is. But it's the law and order piece that bringing that together. And Nick, I mean, I talk about what you talked about, how police and communities. Police are a big part of that because they're interacting with people experiencing homelessness all the time. And I want to say they get, a lot of people talk poorly, but my interactions with a lot, again, they'll say, first of all, when you have a massive police force, you're going to have a few that should not be there. Like Eddie, if you have a mass staff team, there's always a few. Right? Take Julie I'm just kidding. But you do. There's a few apples in the bunch, right? But for the most part, they'll say, "Tell me, teach me." So Blue Door, for example, we're now going into the training center and talking about it, and the police soak it up. For the most part, there's no anger. It's, I want to know because I don't. I have assumptions and they're wrong. And it's incredible. And they're now reaching out, as they've done in Toronto a little bit, in York, saying, I think actually as part of our policing piece is that we should be hiring the team at Blue Door to come with us on a lot of calls, because that would save a lot of what you're talking about, Emily, the criminalization of that. So lots of stuff's happening. I think they're very open. And if you've got a good chief and leadership, they're going to be open to that. Lots of work to do, though. And Emily, it's not just like telling again, but stuff's in cycles, right? Like, I mean, not to go in a totally different direction, but I think, when Roe versus Wade, like years ago that passed, people never thought we'd be having this discussion again. And yet here we are, right? Look at the 2S LGBTQ plus, where, every year people are like, why do we do pride? Like because it's sliding backwards, man. Like we're actually losing support. So this is why you have to continually be at it, right? And it's sad but true, right? And I think you're right. Sometimes I get in that bubble, yeah, we're making progress, and then I realize, like, we're in some ways you got to keep at it, or it is a very slippery slide. And this is the last thing I'll say about the UK in this too, is that when I visited there, I remember in 2017 we did a little bit of our own study tour, and they were talking about they had a kind of a more liberal government in, right? The Labour Party was in until 2010, and they made significant strides. They were spending, rough sleeping was down, things were great. 2010, Conservative Party comes in, and from the last 14 years, they decimated, cut funding, and they've seen rough sleeping. So it's cyclical. Like if you don't continually put the money in, it's not we put the money in, job done. Canada's no different. Until the late 90s, right? Or early 90s, we were doing social housing that stopped, and then homelessness shot up, right? Nick, you put a lot of work around that, research around that. It's you have to continually do it. It's not going to stop. It's not an investment. You stop. And as we've come late to the party around prevention, got to do that too, or you'll never end it, right? And that's the cheaper way to do it. The challenge, Emily, sometimes with prevention, I think, is people don't want to pay for it, because an election cycle, you got 4 years, and prevention takes a little time. Like, is the investment now to pay off years later? And the foresight for that is like, that's not going to get me reelected. All right, so now I'm off on a crazy tangent. We want to talk about, it was an awesome study tour. There's some people there. Abby Bond, the secretary, she's from the city of Toronto. She was on it. It was a variety of different people. Abby actually told me that her dad's name was James, and I fell for it like entirely. And then she said, no, I'm just messing with you. But a great group that you put together. So congratulations on this tour. Like, it was fabulous. I think the feedback you've got is very, very positive. Let's talk about learnings from this year, what you would do differently to the group.
Where do we start? We are all trying to make this thing the best thing possible. So I think that there are a few things that we would do for logistics that we won't bore your listeners with. I'll pass it over to Mel and Nick to talk maybe a bit about what we learned from content, and if there's anything different that we would do there.
So one thing I'll say is every year I think we get this a bit better. Every year there's a learning, and we tweak it and we tighten it up. I think one important learning is that a site tour is not a site tour is not a site tour. So when we got to Poplar Harka, which at least one person has mentioned today, it was a tour that I found mesmerizing, because they didn't even take us inside at first. We met them outside, and we started walking around their community, which they'd been redeveloping over the previous 20 years. And there were some pretty breathtaking scenes, including that youth center and including buildings that they were developing and repurposing. By contrast, there was another site tour where we were inside the corporate boardroom the entire time with no air conditioning. And what I think a learning from that is just be very clear as a group as to what kind of a site tour you're getting. If possible, move around as much if you can. If possible, stay out of boardrooms and walk around more interesting walkable areas. And at the very least, be aware in advance of what you're getting, communicate it to the participants, and ideally try to mix it up a bit.
Yeah, those are great, Nick. And I think on the content side, one of the learnings we had was to make sure that the study tour tells more of a story, right? So it's more of a round circle. You kind of start and you learn about what's happening, and then you're wrapped up at the end. Because one of the feedback aspects we got was, we learned about housing first, which is fantastic. We learned about all the amazing things that they're doing in social housing and all the people that they're helping. But then when we started talking to those serving the houseless organizations, they were saying, well, yes, they're doing that, but the probability of the people we serve of getting into those places is very, very low. So I think if we'd had that perspective prior to going to talking to the housing experts, we could have asked a lot of tougher questions, got a lot more, in depth about what's actually happening and how their full cycle services work. So I think going forward, we're going to be more conscious of the story that we're telling and the order of which we visit things. That was a little bit harder this time. Nick can probably attest to, because the first day we were there was a bank holiday. And so everything was closed, and Nick was finding people to work on their stat holiday off. But I do not believe we're in the next location. Almost let it slip for a bank holiday. So that won't be an aspect anyways.
And one last thing I wanted to add, that this year we had, Mel mentioned it earlier actually, about being in two cohorts of folks, those who work in housing, those who work in homelessness. We had this idea that like maybe there would be more of a separation, but for the most part, folks were all together. So next year we won't offer that separation, and it'll be just one group of people touring around wherever it is we're going. I feel like Mel and I are making like drum roll noises in the background. Like, where are we going? And it's not really intentional. It's not too much of a secret. But next year we'll just have one group of people, and probably for 4 days instead of 5.
You might meld the group.
Meld?
Mel used that word. She said, I melded. I'm like, wow, that is like
I
slogan for Mel, right?
You didn't stop for the pun either. I was
It's my own verb that it's been around long before me, but now it's to meld is
taking it back.
For me, I'm reclaiming it.
That was great. We're going to meld the groups. Okay. What about length? I was there at New York, 3 days. People were like, too short. 5. Some people are running out of steam on day 5. Like, is there a sweet spot? 4 days? I don't know.
Yeah, we're thinking maybe 4. We're thinking maybe one day is going to have some optional activities where you can come for the 5 days, but maybe you don't, do the whole thing. We're thinking the first day will include a city tour of the place that we're going, so that everybody can be together and hang out. We're looking at a 5-day, but we're not sure how filled those 5 days will be at this point.
You guys did an incredible job, right? Because you're dealing with 30 different personalities, where some people are like, I want to hang out with the group all the time, and others are like, I want to stop talking about housing 24/7, so I can go enjoy the city. It's opportunities sometimes to bring your family and do that. So I think you gave the opportunities to people. Some took, some didn't. I thought it was a fabulous trip. Here's one of the learnings too: if Nick Falvo is leading the group, we need one of those backpacks for kids with a little leash on it so we can hold them back. Because, man, like if he goes at a pace, and then if you let, we had Peter take over that because he was, mapping it. And we were prepared. Peter had a first aid kit and everything you need just in case someone went down on that trip. He was, if there was a flash flood, he was wearing the right gear. But Nick, Nick was listening, and I saw some hands go up to try and slow him down. But I think that backpack, Nick, will just we'll have a springy kind of thing so you don't get hurt. But just to hold you back, Nick is an on-time guy. And I felt bad when we were a few minutes behind. I saw the beads of sweat on Nick's forehead and the pacing back and forth, especially when selfies were being taken on a double-decker bus. People were late, not to point any fingers. But Nick, great job. Julie, Mel, great job. Emily, what do you think? Are you in? If depending on, I guess, where we go, and we're going to hear that in a minute, you would go back?
Oh, I would love to. Yeah. Tell my bosses.
I was like, is now the time, Emily? Like, do we do it now? We convince your bosses live on air that we need Emily. We need the youth perspective. She asked great questions. We need Emily in our next location.
Absolutely. It's a must have. And speaking of that, where are we going in 2025?
Mel,
and why?
You do it.
Okay. We're for those of you who were on the tour, for those of you who might have seen pictures of who was on the tour, you might have a little bit of a glimpse, because we had 29 Canadians and then 1 non-Canadian. That is our hint. We had Juha Kahila from the Y Foundation in Helsinki, Finland on our tour, because that is the location of the 2025 study tour to Helsinki, Finland, September 22nd to 26th, 2025. So we have historically done the last two in the spring, but Julie and I are heavily involved in that little thing called Congress in the spring, and it was a lot back to back. So we're moving it to the fall, and it will probably be in the fall going forward. So save the date. Registration will open in September for Helsinki. You need to be a member of either CHRA or CIH, or preferably both, in order to sign up for this amazing study tour. But that's the location.
Listen, yeah, and if you're not like, membership has all these benefits, and now this added one too, that you can get this worldwide knowledge. So become one if you are not one, and also check out the education possibilities at CIH. You heard it from Mel. Not everyone in Canada, so there's not spots there, but there's some open. So get involved. And why? I mean, again, we know the answer. I think in our sector, you hear all the time, Finland is the country that's closest to ending homelessness. They've done some incredible stuff. I'm thinking that's the reason behind it. That's the hopes.
Yeah, they've just done so much. Like they pretty much eradicated homelessness. They're doing so much in the housing sector. There's a lot we can learn, and because we already have a great relationship with them, I think it's going to be a phenomenal study tour.
I think so. I'm excited about it. And listen, Juha, who was on the tour, like, for someone who's not Canadian, he's sure dressed like a typical Canadian. I mean, that guy has more plaid than any Canadian I've ever known.
Yeah, he's got a few colors of the buffalo plaid. So I don't know if he was just trying to fit in, but
the Canadian tuxedo, as we call it. Yeah.
We had a call him earlier today, and he had some on. So maybe it is just his wardrobe.
Or we're more alike than we are different, right? We're going to see that. And Juha was fantastic, and it was great to have him there. So, listen, guys, awesome tour. I think these things are so important for two reasons. A, you're learning about all this wonderful stuff that we can bring back to Canada and implement here. We're learning about opportunities there that maybe we can work with our friends in the UK, but also those connections that you build in that group of people. As you said, it was a really kind of a diverse group, right? And so you had researchers, you had government officials, you had all sorts of different people that I normally wouldn't connect with, that now speaking. And what also inspires me is also speaking to someone like Emily, who's just fresh into this field, really, but is so enthusiastic. I'm like, we're going to be all right. Like, Emily, no pressure, but you're going to have to solve all this stuff because I'm old and my time is limited. But I feel pretty good that we're getting younger and really brilliant people into the field. So awesome to have you on the pod. If people want to find out more, maybe they want to sign up to be a CHRA member or CIH member. Maybe they want to find out about Nick and Homelessness 101, or maybe they want to say, Emily, what the heck is Away Home Canada and the rest doing? I'm going to give you a minute here. Emily, we'll start with you. Where do people?
Yeah, if you're on LinkedIn, I definitely suggest following the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, Away Home Canada, and Making the Shift. Potentially even signing up for Canadian Observatory on Homelessness newsletter. That's how I found out about the New York study tour in the first place. If you want to add me on LinkedIn, it's just Emily Calway. And I also will plug, we are having an International Homelessness Prevention Conference in Toronto, February 24th to 26th, 2025, so this is everyone's official invitation. And it will be an awesome opportunity to learn more about the incredible work being done in this space in Canada, but also elsewhere, specifically as it relates to youth homelessness prevention in research, policy, practice, and planning.
Very cool. Mel?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Mel Willerth. You can find CIH, the Chartered Institute of Housing Canada, on LinkedIn. You can go to our website. It's currently in the works of being redone, so please don't judge us too harshly on it. You can email me, mel@chra-achru.ca. And again, if we're allowed to do plugs, I will throw in too. We have an amazing program called the Housing Professional Mentorship Program that we're currently accepting applications for both mentors and mentees in. You can go to the CHRA website for that and just plug in HPMP to find out more information. And then if you're interested in professionalizing your career, getting that education to kind of back you up. We do have both the certified and the chartered membership courses starting in September, with applications closing mid-September. And for the chartered membership, for those in leadership, we do have some bursaries available because of some great funding from CMHC. So if you're interested in either of those, again, send me an email, send me a message on LinkedIn, and we will get in touch.
Very cool.
So for
Thanks.
that wait list, that Michael mentioned earlier, you can go to CHRA's website, which is chra-achru.ca. And there will be a wait list available, but only come September. So between now and September, you should become a member of CHRA, get on the newsletter list, and then it'll magically appear in your inbox when it's ready to go. For where you can find me, LinkedIn, my name, I think, appears on a little bar down here in the screen. So it's Julie McNamara. And then if I'm going to plug something, because we all are, Emily, you made it a trend. You got your official invitation to attend Emily's event in February, but as Nick mentioned earlier, CHRA's National Congress on Housing and Homelessness is happening in Saskatoon from April 29th to May 1st. So it's a good time of year to be in Saskatoon, sunny Saskatoon, as we like to say. So that registration will open towards the end of the year as well.
I'm glad you clarified too, because I think for listeners who might not know it, when you said Mel and I are involved in Congress, this is with CHRA and not.
It's our 3-day. Nick has taught a pre-Congress course. Maybe he's coming back to teach another one. We don't know.
Last year they lost his luggage and he had to teach it in track pants and a t-shirt. He'd be wearing it for 3 days, but he still got through it.
Yeah.
To be clear, the airline lost his luggage,
Not us.
CHRA. So
That's true. Or did they? Or Nick just is, cutting back and just wearing t-shirts and track pants. You don't know.
That hoodie. Wear the hoodie the entire time. And you know what, Nick? You're welcome to teach your courses in whatever makes you comfortable.
Well, and he was turning his hat sideways so he'd fit in with the kids. Nick, what are you working on? Where can people find out about Falvo Consulting and all the awesome stuff? There's free resources you talked about before. You do incredible work. Where can they find it?
Yeah, go to nickfalvo.ca. That's my website where I have an open access textbook and lots of blog posts. I'm happy to say, too, that for people who did not get the chance to go to London, who'd like to know more about the content of that tour, or even for people who did go to London, a detailed summary of that tour is about to go to layout and should be ready in July. You can check my website, nickfalvo.ca, or you can reach out to me some other way. But we are very proud to make a publicly available summary of that tour available. It's about 30 pages long. It's quite substantial. So do not hesitate to check that out. And yes, the top 10 points will be summarized in a blog post.
Nick's very good that way. He always does. I think it's for people like myself who he really he simplifies it. Here's the 10 points, Mike, that you need to, but it's great and appreciated. When Nick goes on these tours, he's got that laptop and he's typing it all times, and for this reason, so he can take it back and share it with so many people. So thank you for that, Nick. Thanks to all of you for the important and impactful work that you continue to do, for joining today. And hopefully we'll have you back next year to talk about what happened in Helsinki. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thanks, Michael.
Yes.